Welcome back. New Destiny's mission is to end the cycle of domestic violence as well as homelessness for low-income families and individuals by developing and connecting them to safe, permanent, and affordable housing as well as services. Governor Kathy Hochul recently had a 5-year housing plan focused on affordable housing and mitigating barriers to access public assistance in the 2023 enacted budget. Joining me now and sharing more is the Executive Director of New Destiny Housing, Nicole Branca, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Darren. It's nice to be here again.
Glad to have you back and sharing again. Talk to me a little bit about the issue where we are dealing with this issue of housing and homelessness, because as we look at homelessness across New York City, some would think by now things would get better. But when we talk to people with boots on the ground, they say, Darren, it's not as easy as that.
Yeah, I mean, we all see it as New Yorkers. We see homelessness everywhere we go. Our organization, New Destiny, focuses laser-like on families and individuals who are homeless and are homeless because of domestic violence, and they're really a hidden population. So there's a network of domestic violence shelters throughout the city, and we have thousands of families, 10,000 people a year who cycle through these shelters. And we're focused on trying to build as much housing as we can for these families, and whenever possible, prevent them from having to go into shelter in the first place. You probably know this because of the work that you do, but domestic violence is the #1 reason for families entering shelter in the city.
Yeah, when we talk about domestic violence, it's pretty huge. It's pretty huge across the city. It's pretty huge across the state. Give us some insight as to where we are post-COVID, because we know during COVID, families were forced to stay together. And from all that we know, a lot of numbers continue to rise, particularly coming out of COVID. How have we been able to navigate the rise that's come since COVID?
Yeah, it continues to be one of the #1 reasons why people seek shelter. COVID was, not only kept families in abusive households, but as you mentioned, the economy also tanked, and a lot of our families are low income and work jobs that were service jobs that were lost during the pandemic, and we've seen a very slow recovery. And the families that we're working with now have experienced a few extra years of trauma by not being able to go into a safe place. So we're definitely seeing higher rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and are seeking more mental health services to help our families. And that's actually it's our top legislative priority for this year. We're very pleased to see Governor Hochul, as you mentioned, with her housing plan, and the mayor have done a lot to increase resources for domestic violence survivors and their families. But we have a lot of families that we already house, and we also need to protect those families from recidivating back to homelessness, going back to their abuser. So our top priority is actually having the state increase the funding that they have for a very old program called the New York State Supportive Housing Program, that doesn't give providers like New Destiny enough money to keep both case managers and security in our buildings. So we are very lucky to have council members like Councilmember Sanchez who give us discretionary money, and some foundations that give us money. But the state really needs to prioritize helping the families that are, one foundation grant or one council member grant away from losing either their case managers that are helping them recover from the trauma, and or the security guards that are keeping their buildings safe. So we're really hoping that the legislature and the governor focuses on increasing this old night shift program this year.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the problem, but we know the solution is tied to permanent supportive housing. That's something that so many people are advocating for. But walk us behind the door. Give me a little bit about permanent supportive housing and why that is of such value to victims of domestic violence.
Absolutely. Domestic violence survivors and a lot of other people who have experienced homelessness, they obviously need subsidized housing to climb out of the situation that they're in. And with domestic violence survivors, it's that much more important to find a safe space, because they're obviously lives are at risks, or they wouldn't have fled and left their home for shelter. And supportive housing provides this affordable housing, so no tenant pays more than a third of their income in rent, which gives them long-term stability in their apartment, and they have a lease and they can stay as long as they want. But what supportive housing does is it provides on-site services. So, our families have gone through a lot of trauma. As I mentioned, they often experience, and not just the it's usually the mother, but the children as well have lived through this vicarious trauma or the abuse themselves. And so we provide on-site services and supportive housing to help both the parent and the children find a new community. They've left everything behind, but then also work with them to gain the resources that they need and get the help that they need to recover from this PTSD and anxiety and depression and a myriad of other issues that we would all expect would happen if you're living with abuse for years on end.
There is a concern by many on the inside, Nicole, about where the supportive housing rates are. Because when you talk about funding supportive housing rates and getting funding into supportive housing rates, we know that there hasn't been a raise or an increase, if you will, in just about 3 decades, if I'm correct. So talk to me about
That's right.
How we're going to be able to break that cycle, given the fact that we need to attack supportive housing. No question about it. So you got a problem of A, supportive housing, and then B, I got to get these rates increased to be able to meet the needs, particularly with the cost of living increase.
Yeah, so we're fighting this on two ends. First is this night shift program. That's the one that's 3 decades old, the New York State supportive housing program, and that is that's where we can't afford the staff that we have, and never mind cost of living adjustments, which we obviously want to give our staff year in and year out and living wages. But then we're also fighting to increase funding so that we can build more supportive housing, and that's the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative. We're working with the Supportive Housing Network of New York and providers across the state so that we can increase the funding for this program called ESHI, so we can develop more supportive housing. Because you can't build the buildings unless you have a commitment for the operating and services funding for the building. So it really does fuel production. And if we want to build more buildings and provide this housing for DV survivors and veterans and other families and individuals who are struggling with homelessness, then we need the state to increase these ESHI rates as well.
Yeah. Make our public aware of the initiatives that you have via legislation. I know there's some things you're really advocating for. How can the public really get behind you and support some of these initiatives? Let's first of all make the public aware of what these initiatives are and how they can put their voice to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. We have 2 legislative priorities that we're working on as New Destiny, and then with larger coalitions across the state. One is to increase the HAVP is what it's called, and it's getting a lot of traction. So we're hopeful this would create a new rental subsidy for the state. So most people are familiar with Section 8, but that's a federal program, and only 1 in 4 families that are eligible for Section 8 receive it. So year after year after year, we can't rely on the federal government to make up for this need. And so we're asking the state to do their part and create this homeless assistance voucher program, which would be comparable to Section 8 and help meet this need. And then the other legislative priority that we're working on is very similar. It's the city's rental subsidy, because we think they should also help with this crisis. And that is, they've already created the program. It's called City FEPS. And we're hopeful that they will expand the eligibility to include immigrant families. We have a lot of mixed status families in our work with helping domestic violence survivors, and this would really open the door for families who weren't born here but live here and have experienced this abuse and need help.
When we talk about the ears of elected officials, what do you think? Are you getting the necessary traction that you need to have a supportive ear for this matter? When it talks about homelessness, domestic violence victims, the things that we're talking about here, housing, are our public officials really stepping up to the plate in terms of hearing, but not just hearing, but really, because everybody hears, right? But I need you to address this. So talk to me about addressing. Are you comfortable with that?
I mean, you never know until the budget's over, but we do feel like the leadership in Albany is listening to us. You know, the governor has domestic violence in her family, and she got her start opening a domestic violence program in upstate New York, and so we're always hopeful that she'll continue to support programs like this, and then we have great leadership. We have Assembly Member Rosenthal and Senator Kavanaugh have been supportive year in and year out with programs like this. So we're hopeful. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But if things don't go your way, let's just look at it as a positive. If we don't see
hmm
these things happen, how far of a setback would that be for what you do?
Well, again, we have 10,000 people cycle through the DV shelter system each year, and thousands more go through the city's general population shelter. So, and we can't make a dent in that, and we can't help those families if we don't get more resources. And we were lucky this last year to get an emergency program from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan, but that ends this year, and so we've been able to stem the tide because of this federal program. But if the state and city don't step up, then we'll see an increase in
Yeah.
shelter. Absolutely, especially I'm sure you're covering the eviction rates going back up. So we fully anticipate if there's not something done to see evictions go up and more people end up in shelter, including DV survivors.
Well, we knew that once the housing moratorium rates ended, or I should say the housing moratorium ended, and you knew that people were going to have to be forced to pay rent in certain situations, we were going to see more record evictions. And landlords have been saying that to us for a long period of time. And then when you couple into those people, couple in with that other groups, we knew for certain that we'd be seeing, particularly in the area of homeless and then also domestic violence victims, that number would potentially increase. And so there is a great awareness. I don't know if the state is as prepared as we think they should be, but certainly I think that we have to raise the bar to let somebody know these
Yeah.
victims really really need some assistance. And we're not asking for something. We're not asking for a handout. We're really asking for a hand up.
That's right. And one other priority I didn't mention is around public assistance. That also hasn't been increased in decades. And like Social Security, it needs to be indexed to inflation so that our lowest income New Yorkers can afford to pay rent and pay for other necessities. And so, as New Destiny is also a landlord, right? So we have huge arrears in our buildings. We're a nonprofit and we're doing everything we can to keep our tenants, but we also, this when they're in difficult situations, when they lose jobs, when the economy is as tight as it is, the job market's as tight as it is, the housing market is as tight as it is. We really need the state to provide our families with more income any way they can, and this is an opportunity to right a long-term wrong with decades of not increasing the cash assistance rate in the state. So we're feeling somewhat good about that because we're hearing both the administration and the legislators talk about this. So that would certainly go a long way to keep families in their housing and not go in droves to housing court and be evicted.
Yeah. How how does it get to a place? Can you give us some examples? Because when we make the correlation between homelessness and domestic violence, some people can't make that
hmm
correlation. So can you just make the correlation for some of our viewers as to how these two coexist?
Sure. So with domestic violence, a typical case is somebody's experiencing physical abuse in the home, but in 95 to 99% of the cases, it's also economic abuse. So they don't have any access to their own bank account, their own credit cards. Their credit is usually terrible, and they don't even know about it because they haven't controlled it. And so, when somebody decides enough is enough, and I need to be safe for myself and kids if they have kids, then they're leaving with nothing. They have absolutely nothing. And so they may not have, the family and friends that they have are all connected to their abuser probably. So, when they have a safe second bedroom or couch to stay on, they do. But more often than not, they have to leave their entire community, their whole network, And unfortunately, that means shelter. And in New York City, we're lucky to have a legal right to shelter, so people do have a safe haven to go to. But that's not a long-term solution. Kids are, shouldn't be living in shelter and going to school. And, we need to find permanent homes that are safe and allow families to start to rebuild a new community and have staff on site that can help them, build their finances back up, et cetera.
And that's the work that New Destiny does, right, Nicole? I mean, you really help people
Yes.
get back on their feet. So educate our viewers a little bit more on how that happens. You have a family, you have an individual that really goes through the
Hmm.
situation. What's the process? I come through and I say, New Destiny, I need some help. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so there's really two ways of accessing New Destiny. One is through the Family Justice Centers. There's one in each of the 5 boroughs, and you can find information online. And if you come in and you say, I need housing, you'll be connected to one of our staff. The other way is through shelter. We also take referrals from shelter for our housing that we develop and run. And sorry.
No worries.
um, the downside of hybrid work these days. Um, and once you get connected to us, if you go to the FJCs, we will find you an apartment in the community. So if you need a Section 8 voucher, or hopefully one of these new state vouchers, we will work with you to find a landlord that will take you and your family and find you a safe space. And then we will provide you services to make sure that you are stable in your new apartment, whether that's finding a new school for your kids, some healthcare, mental health care, financial literacy training, what have you, whatever it takes to get your family back on their feet again. And then if you go into our buildings, we have those services right on site, and we will provide whatever case management you need and connect you to as many services as it takes. And then we work with you, especially in our buildings, because we're right there with you. This amazing family support program team that does, has everything from a holistic care of doing yoga and meditation to draw families out and give them a safe space where they feel like they can open up, to more in-depth case management to help them with connecting to resources and working with them on the trauma that they and their kids have gone through, and work with them to open up and start to heal.
Yeah. As a person with boots on the ground, what kind of trends are you seeing in your work, given the fact that we're at a place where spring is just about coming up, but we also see that also we're coming out of the winter. There are a lot of things that happen during this time of year. Are you seeing any particular trends during this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, there's always an increase in family homelessness in the summer when school's out. So, that's always something we're watching. But something we've started to see more of lately is individuals who are experiencing domestic violence, and it's not just women; it's predominantly women, but both women and men are fleeing their abuser, and they don't have a safe space to go. Most domestic violence shelter is for families, and so we're increasingly concerned about individuals who are fleeing violence and don't even have shelter. So it's whenever possible, we try to get them right into housing, but we at least need the shelter there. So that's a trend that we're seeing, that we're we know a lot of our partners like Safe Horizon, Urban Resource Institute are working on to create more of a safety net for individuals.
Nicole, somebody out there watching say, listen, I want to be connected to the services and find out more about the services you provide. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah, Family Justice Centers. The mayor's office to end domestic and gender-based violence. It's on their website. There's phone numbers, there's the hours that they're open, and there's the addresses. They can go to the Family Justice Centers, and we are the resource if you walk in to say, I need housing. And so you get connected to our staff right away.
Yeah. And before we go, I just want to ask you that question because you did allude to that a little bit earlier on. You were talking about victims of domestic violence. And traditionally, we know that women will be the majority. But from your perspective right now, you're seeing a lot more men come forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's still 90% women and mostly families as well. But as we're thinking about policies and developing housing and shelter, we also need to consider the individuals, young adults, runaway homeless youth. There's a lot of people who need this support. And it's not just the traditional family, but it's still mostly the traditional family.
All right, Nicole, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us and being with us. And certainly want to thank you for the work that New Destiny is doing to help those in the area of domestic violence. Glad to see you one more time.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Okay. Take care.
All right, take care. Well, we're taking a quick break. We want you to stay with us. We have another guest, a couple more to share with you here on the Social Justice Forum.